Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of TGI Kubernetes. I'm Joe Beda. I'll be your host for today. And for those not in the know, TGI Kubernetes is a weekly live stream that we do where we cover all things Kubernetes. I started it when we were a small baby startup called Heptio. And we've joined VMware, and here we are. So every week I try and go online, learn something new, or me or some other folks talk about what's happening in the ecosystem, what's happening with Kubernetes, and then dive into some technology. And I haven't been able to do as many recently as I really want to. And so Duffy's been helping to pick up the slack. And so just a huge thank you to Duffy for really doing some awesome TGIKs while I've been so busy doing so many other things. So first of all, what I love to do is I love to say hi to everybody from around the world that's joining us. I know that this is the worst time ever because, you all are done for the week, but hopefully, you can either catch this live or catch this after the fact. We have Walid from saying hello and telling us we're talking about Kubernetes versus Kube versus Kates when we write stuff. It's the K8S actually came later. I'm not sure who introduced that. We started talking Cube early on when before we went public, but then the K8S nomenclature came later. Martin from the Netherlands, Pratik from India, Rory from Scotland, Gledson, good to see you. Alex, who eats kittens, please don't eat kittens. Rodolfo, Vivian from Munich. Duffy's actually sort of watching on the other end here, helping out. Lamatti, good to see you. Phil from New York, Alex. Yeah, so I'll tell you about my quarantine experience. I'm getting a little crazy, but staying home, staying safe. The kids are in the house and they're getting a little stir crazy too. We're cooking a lot. Zolt from Finland. Jason, ex-Heptio person with us here at VMware. You see my Heptio posters that we had in the background. We had these commissioned right before we sold to VMware, and they're just so awesome. I'm kind of bummed that we're not using them more. So I had them printed up on metal, and they're sitting behind me here. Let's see. George is off today, so he's doing some family stuff, I think. So he's not helping out. Mozaffar, good to see you. Tim from Frankfurt. Thomas. Sudeep from Toronto. Slim and trim, a lot of stress with the quarantine and the virus. I think I'm losing weight because of it. All right. Let's see. So we have, and then Scott is in Seattle. He's one of the folks that's doing some of the cloud event stuff that also a member of the Knative team. So he can definitely give us some feedback on the cloud event stuff. And we have Vibe. Tell me how to pronounce your name if you can do it phonetically. Who's joining us also? Who is, I believe, one of the folks behind the Argo event stuff that we're going to be taking a look at. So we got stuff going. Antonia's asking why the astronauts on the posters as the motif. Well, so it turns out that the story of these posters is that I was talking with our marketing folks and I'm like, hey, I want to do some really cool posters for Heptio, and I want these things to sort of be about sort of exploration, trying new things. Because, that's a lot of what we're doing with Kubernetes, with infrastructure and stuff. And so my inspiration there was, and I can take the camera off and we can take a look at it, were these posters that are actually made by NASA that are sort of Mars exploration posters. So those things, and I don't know the artist's name off the top of my head, but I mentioned this to Scott, our marketing person, and he actually went off and found that artist and commissioned him to actually do the Heptio posters also. And so I really think these are cool. So we have like a sort of maritime explorer with a 8-spoke wheel. I'm not going to complain. We have like a jungle explorer, like an astronaut, and then somebody who's like going through the desert, or maybe they're on Mars. I'm not sure. So yeah, really, really excited about those. I love them. Okay. Yeah. So today, I welcome to everybody. I'm just going to jump in because otherwise we'll never get going. Let me switch to my screen here. So Jordy, yes, this does get recorded. If you go to tgik.io, you can see the playlist of all the TGIKs. And that is the, we record all of these things because it is tough to catch these things live for sure. Federico, good to see you. All right, so today we're going to be covering Cloud Events and Argo Events, and sort of I'm going to be digging into sort of the eventing landscape in general. Talking with Scott, I think it might be interesting to look at how events are used in Knative in a future episode, but we're not going to be looking at that today. I think I wanted to do something Argo related because what's happening right now in the CNCF is that the TOC, which I'm no longer a member of, I only had a 1-year term, but the Technical Oversight Committee for the CNCF is in the process of actually bringing Argo, the Argo project, into the CNCF. And so that's something really exciting that I figured I'd dig into another one of the Argo projects as part of this. But there's a lot of exciting stuff going on this week, and huge thank you to Duffy for pulling together all the links here. So the Kubernetes 1.18 released, I believe, yesterday. And so a huge thank you to all the folks that actually made that happen. Doing a Kubernetes release is not easy. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of cats to herd. And so it's an amazing accomplishment every time we actually make this stuff happen. And so huge thank you to the folks driving that. So there's a blog post here that goes into a lot of the details, talking about all the stuff that's actually making its way to stable. A lot of really good stuff happening here. There's some other changes that are happening in terms of some of the earlier stuff that's in the beta phase right now. And just as a reminder, when we mark APIs in Kubernetes as being alpha or beta, that's really about the sort of ongoing commitment to that API. Once something hits stable, we have a deprecation policy where we won't change or deprecate that API for, I believe, 3 or 4 versions. Whereas when we're in beta, we want the implementation to be solid, but we also know that we're still learning about the best form of the API. And so a lot of the stuff that's in beta, the APIs are changing, but we're still moving forward with the feature, and that doesn't actually speak to the quality of the implementation behind it. Oftentimes it's really, really good. So yeah, and then who made the logo? Because the logo is really cool. It's a Large Hadron Collider inspired logo for Kubernetes 1.8. And I love that, you know, the folks who put together these releases sort of have that sort of esprit de corps around, in it, shipping it, and then, doing some custom sort of logos or swag or something like that you can only get if you're really helping out and helping to get the release out. So that's actually really, really cool. And so apparently Maru Lango made the logo, which is really cool. So that is the official blog post, and these are all in the TGIK notes, which we're using HackMD for these things. And just a huge shout out to the folks at HackMD. I actually talked to them earlier today about some of the stuff that they're doing. It's been a really great tool for us, and I'm going to try and get them connected with some of the folks upstream and looking at ways that we can maybe use HackMD in more ways in the community. I think that might be fun also. But if you go to tgik.io/notes, you'll actually get to this, and you can add some of your own notes, have some of the sort of time things, and I'm going to copy and paste this into the repo as we go. So Sysdig did a really nice blog post of what's new in 1.8 also. And I think they really called out some of the most exciting things that are going on here. So the there's some really good security stuff here. There's been a bunch of stuff that's been ongoing around being able to use service account tokens for more than just talking back to the Kubernetes API server. So that's really good to see. There's a API refactoring and change with the signing, the certificate signing API. Kube control debug. I haven't seen this yet. So this creates debug containers and redeploys pods with a different configuration. I mean, I would love to play with this sometime if folks have a good sort of tutorial on this, because this looks really cool. And I want to understand, it's an alpha right now, so it's still early on, but that's something that I think is going to be super useful for being able to debug stuff. So yeah, so the Sysdig blog post is actually really, really exciting. And it goes through a bunch of the good changes also. So if you all have, changes that you think are big features in 1.18 that you think we should cover at some point, definitely drop it in the comments or file an issue in the TGIK repo. And we'll definitely be looking at that as something that we can dig into in the future episodes of TGIK. All right, so I want to keep moving here. Let's see. So I hadn't seen this. So CNCF project webinar, what's new? Oh, this is another sort of webinar that's going to be in April. Okay, so a little bit about a month from now, coming from let's see, what do we have here? Coming from the release team, talking about what's new. So that's awesome. So Jeremy, and I know I saw on Twitter that Jeremy has some, his father is sick. And so let's send good positive thoughts out to Jeremy right now. And so they're going to be going over the details of what happened in 1.18. So that looks good. All right, so on the Tanzu side, so on the VMware side, I just want to say, we did a big announcement on March 10th. Really exciting here, talking about VMware's investments in the Kubernetes space. Both are, as we look to build a business around Kubernetes to complement a lot of the work that we're doing upstream. And so if you want to check out what's going on there, this is a great blog post. And then we did this big sort of video thing that I believe is probably linked off of here also. So this is the details of what we're doing with Tanzu commercially. So quick commercial plug there of check it out. And then the Kubernetes podcast from Google has an interview with Zhang Li from who works on etcd. And so that looks really, really good too. And so definitely check that out. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but it's definitely on my list. Yeah, let's see. So I'm reading some of the comments here. So Winston says, or Thomas says that the CNCF is doing a virtual conference next week. So TGIK, TKG deployment. Yeah, I think that would be, I think, as I would love to do an episode where we actually go through the ins and outs of TKG and what that experience looks like. It's really, really built on top of Cluster API. So a lot of the TGIKs that Duffy's been doing around Cluster API are very relevant to TKG. Let's see. So here's a blog post on migrating from Helm 2 to 3. Definitely Helm 3 is a huge step forward in terms of security, getting rid of Tiller. My understanding is that there might be some gotchas as you go. And so this looks like a pretty comprehensive blog post going over sort of what it takes to migrate. So thank you for that. And then this is really cool. DigitalOcean has some of the best tutorials and content out there that is really about just sort of hey, I want to get some stuff done. How do I make it happen? And this is really fascinating because they have a lot of these things in different languages, which is really cool. So 13 in Spanish, 20 in Portuguese, and 14 in Russian. And so I love to see that sort of worldwide focus as we bring folks who don't necessarily speak English well, make this technology accessible to them. So Lee's asking about sort of why was Tiller a security risk? So Tiller really, oh, Duffy, were you doing Gus's article? I don't think I don't think the link came through. But Tiller, what it did is it ran generally with sort of very wide privileges on the cluster, and it kind of existed before we really had RBAC in Kubernetes, and it had its own API that generally, or at least with a lot of default installs, didn't have any authentication on it. And so anytime you talk to Tiller, it was essentially asking Tiller to do whatever you want on the cluster. And so let me go through and I'll find August Lee's Tiller Helm. So let me find that. So this is Gus, who's now at Amazon. Wrote this article that goes into a lot of the problems. Now, I think after this came out, because this was 2017, they did do some work to make it more secure by default. But in general, Tiller was hard to secure in a way that sort of like integrated well with the security model of Kubernetes. Let's see, and then there's a couple of CVEs out that are really interesting here. One in the kubelet and one in the API server. And there's a Twitter thread here that has a summary of these. This, I think, is fascinating. And I think that there's something to really be learned here about this. And this is in interaction with generally how people do monitoring and the implications that this can have from a denial of service memory point of view. So generally the way that monitoring works in sort of a Prometheus-based world is that you actually keep track of some metrics inside of your program, and then you publish those to Prometheus using a standard format. And a lot of times, like, you want to make sure that the metrics that you publish there aren't too many of those things, because if you have more and more metrics that you're publishing, you can go through and really sort of blow out some of the limits. It takes a lot of memory in your program and can actually overload your monitoring stack also. And one of the ways that we think about metrics is that you have a name, but then you can have these different ways of sort of parameterizing the metrics. So you could say, I want to have a average time based on the HTTP verb. And so then you would have a metric based on put and get and head and that type of things. There was a problem in Kubernetes where I believe that the metrics were then split out by, if I'm not mistaken here, were split out by the client ID on when users actually, maybe this was like the user agent ID when calling the server. And so that meant that a malicious user could make a bunch of calls to the Kubernetes server with slightly different and long client IDs, and then in doing so actually cause the cluster to the API server to run out of memory. And so I think the lesson from here, which I think is really fascinating, is that you don't want to have user input drive the metrics that you're actually exposing, because if you do that, then that becomes a vector for essentially a out-of-memory denial of service attack on you. So yeah, really interesting kind of subtle bug there, because it's not obvious. You're like, oh, I just want to check the different clients and how many clients are contacting me. And well, it turns out that if you let the client specify that ID, that becomes a problem. All right, so that is the news of the week. Clearly, the big news is 1.18 being out there. We're all excited for that. And in doing so, and Duffy helped me figure this out. I upgraded all the stuff running on my machine so that I'm running Kubernetes 1.18. If I go here and if I do kube control, get version, you can see I'm running 1.18 for both the client and the server. I'm doing this with kind on my local machine, and I dropped sort of like, on a Mac, this is how easy it is to actually get a local 1.18 server up and running. So if you want to play around with that, there you go. That's the easiest way. All right, so there's two things that I'm going to be covering today, and they're very much related. So the first one is this project that started as a working group. It was an output of the serverless working group in the CNCF that's called CloudEvents. And this is really more of a spec plus a bunch of tools. It's not really a system in terms of like a lot of the other things that we think about. And then I'm going to be looking at Argo, Argo eventing. Let's see. So this is Argo Events. As something that actually uses the cloud event stuff. And we'll be talking about the relationship between these things. And I think the relationship between Cloud Events and Argo is similar in some ways between, say, the relationship between Cloud Events and something like Knative. And so I think it's really interesting that we have, we're finding ways to create standards that create value and ways to be able to reuse things across multiple different environments, which is really interesting. And so definitely looking for finding other places where cloud events actually come into play, whether it be with Knative or beyond that. So there's a website, a cloudevents.io website that looks really interesting and really talks about what's going on here. And fundamentally what cloud events is it's a way to take an event and then express it using a standard schema. So fundamentally, it's a sort of schema specification. That's the thrust of what Cloud Events is. And then there's a guidance on, or a specification on, okay, now you want to send an event. How do you do that via HTTP? Or you want to encode an event. How do you do that via JSON? But with the idea that there's like a whole bunch of different ways to send events, there's a whole bunch of different ways to encode events, but there's sort of a common set of attributes that apply to this stuff. And so linked off of the Cloud Events page, there's a primer that goes into a lot of the details of what this looks like. And I think one of the interesting things, as I was doing just a little bit of cursory research here, is that there is a slight difference between an event and a message. An event is just a statement that something happened at a certain time, whereas a message generally has extra metadata around routing, like who are you sending the message to? How do you respond to that message? There's a whole bunch of sort of identity and forwarding going on that doesn't apply to events, that does apply to messages. But I think that there's a bunch of, messaging systems can also be used for events. So it's very, very common for folks to take something like Cloud Events and then throw that into Kafka or NATS, or, transmit it over something like HTTP or MQTT. All know what MQTT is? I discovered this. It's an IoT protocol for messaging. That's really, really cool. I started playing with it, just this is a total sidebar, but I bought these off of Amazon. You can get these like little smart plugs, and these things are like Wi-Fi enabled plugs, and you can like flash this custom firmware on it. And I got this from my coffee machine, and for this one to do the custom firmware, you have to like open it up and solder a jumper or solder a controller on there. But the idea is that like we see these echoes between sort of like, okay, how do we have events and communication in sort of like an IoT context? How does that relate to sort of like I check something into GitHub? It's really fascinating to me, at least, to see these sort of worlds colliding through protocols like MQTT. So some cool stuff there. So yeah, so the idea here is that Cloud Events is essentially a standard schema for what goes into an event, with a bunch of sort of metadata about that event, along with sort of essentially a data payload. There's a provision for extensions so that you can, have extra types of extensible metadata. And then how do you actually encode this into something like JSON? How do you actually send it over HTTP? And so I'm just learning about this because I'm new, but you can see that like the core things that we see, there's like a data model and stuff, is like the ID, the source, the spec version, the type of the event. And then there's things like a MIME type for the data, schema for the data, the subject, which, it's like, hey, there's an event from S3. So the S3 would be the source. And the subject is that, hey, there's an object added. And then the subject would be the object that was added to S3, right? So that would be an example of how these things play together. And, the source might be, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, the source would be the bucket, for example, and then the subject would be the name of the object. And then the type could be something like a new object created, right? And so standardizing sort of how we encode that stuff is really what we're getting into here. And then time. And so it's a very sort of thin set of capabilities, but the idea is that it ends up showing up something like this. And with the idea that there is, here's sort of Microsoft Event Grid, right? And we have Google Cloud Functions, and we have AWS CloudWatch events and IBM Open. So all of these things, are events with their own way of expressing it. And CloudEvents is trying to actually provide a way to standardize all of this stuff. So this is sort of like an example of the sort of range of events that CloudEvents is trying to actually corral everything into. And then combined with that is a set of SDKs in, like, say, here's like the Go SDK for being able to send, receive, encode events, that type of thing. And and so Scott Nichols was chatting with me a little bit before this episode. I think, let's see, he sent me some interesting stuff that's actually coming on here. So there's like, here's an example of essentially creating a small little program that listens on HTTP and then hoists that event onto a NAPS queue, right? So that's sort of like the idea, is that it's super easy to deal with events in a sort of abstract way like that. And we're going to see that when we start looking at Argo events. My understanding is Argo events doesn't use the Go SDK, but I think they want to get there. So they're not there quite yet. But that's okay, because it's a binary specification, or at least it's a wire specification. So that means it's totally reasonable to have multiple implementations. And then something else that Scott pointed me to is that there's this cool tool, the CloudEvents conformance testing, which is actually a good command line tool for sending events. And so I think this might be a fun thing to, as we look to send events to Argo events, we can actually see some level of interoperability using tools like this. And I think, I think I ran this. So it's a work in progress tool. So yeah. CloudEvents, echo export path equals, sorry, I don't have the go what's it, the go path / bin, will that work? Wait, what am I doing wrong? Okay, you can do CloudEvents, listen, and it'll start up a sync also. Okay. So go path. Okay, so what am I doing? Is my bash? Oh, you know what? What? Oh, I screwed up my path. I really screwed things up. Let me start a new thing here. I think I'm like in Z shell now, so I think that's, so what do I have? I have go path, export go path equals TGIK go. That should work. Export path equals path colon go path bin. There we go. Okay, so now I have the CloudEvents tool. Okay. Yeah, at some point I need to actually learn Z shell or figure it out. Yeah. Okay, so we're all set here, and then I have my, I believe, yeah, I still have my kind cluster up and running. Okay, cool. So yeah, so we're going to play with that. So this actually looks like a super useful tool when working with CloudEvents, because you can both send and listen on these things. and it looks like there's a to-do list there if you all want to get involved. Okay, Lee's asking, before I go on to Argo Events, talk about sort of what Argo is and sort of how Argo Events actually fits into it. That's a really good prompt. That's definitely something I should do. Let's see. And then the other thing that Scott pointed me to is he created this tool called Sockeye, which looks really interesting. And this is something that that you can run that is essentially something that can receive cloud events, and then it actually displays it. And so it's a great way to essentially visualize the cloud events that you're seeing. So I would love to maybe we can figure this out as like, I want to understand sort of if Argo events can actually sort of act as a router and dispatch to a running pod or something. That might be an interesting thing also. Okay, so that's what Cloud Events is. And it's one of those things where it's hard to do a demo of Cloud Events because it's just a specification. It's like, do me a demo of HTTP. Well, it's hard to do that without talking and having a browser or a web server or whatever. So I think it's really useful for us to look at this in the context of Argo Events. And so that does beg the question, and thanks for Lee for the... Scott says, please help with his stuff if you want to help out. So that, we should take a look at sort of the Argo project in general. And this is something that I did an episode on Argo workflows a long time ago when Argo was just getting started. And it's really been awesome to see the community form up around Argo and really see where this stuff has gotten. And along the way, Argo has sort of mutated a little bit, right? Because it started out, and if you go back and watch that old TGIK, which I don't know when that was a long time ago. Let's look. It was, TGIK 20. So it was like, 90 TGIKs ago, right? When I did it there, at that point, it was just Argo workflows, which is a way of describing, launch this particular container, take the outputs, forward it here. And so the workflows and pipeline stuff is still going strong. A lot of uptake in the machine learning community around that. Kubeflow uses it, I believe. So that's one of the places where it actually showed up. But then along the way, Argo really turned into essentially a toolkit for doing a bunch of automation type of stuff. And so what we see here is that we have Argo workflows, we have Argo continuous deployment, Argo rollouts, which is essentially a way of doing rolling out and rollbacks, and then events is another part of the Argo project. One of the other fascinating things that's happening is that the folks at Weaveworks are joining forces with Argo, and we're seeing that. I believe it's Weave Flux and Weave and so Argo Flux, and so the idea is to bring these things together, and that's happening through this project called GitOps Engine as part of Argo. And so you may look at this and see that, hey, nothing's happened in months, but it turns out that I believe I think there's stuff happening on a branch. I'm not sure, because this stuff is happening. I know there is work ongoing here, yeah, I don't know. I was talking to Alexis, who's the CEO of Weave, and I know that there is some work ongoing here. So we're actually seeing sort of some consolidation as we see, more folks look at the Argo toolkit and figure out, how they can start using these bits and pieces for different things. So that's actually really cool. So Argo Flux there, and then I believe that Flagger is also... there might be some overlap between Flagger and Argo rollouts. And so I think that there's some work to actually bring those things together also. I'm not totally up on what the latest there is, but it's definitely an exciting space. But anyway, so like generally the idea is that, a workflow is like do X and then do, Y and then do Z. And if it fails, do A. And if it succeeds, do B, right? So that is like generally like the workflow pipeline stuff is. But then that really begs the question of like, well, when do you run a workflow? And that's where the event stuff comes in. It's really about, you know, hey, there's some sort of event happens someplace. How do we get that into the system and then decide how do we want to react to that event? And so that is the purpose of the Argo Events project. And Vibhab, and again, I apologize if I'm messing your name up. You said I did okay, but I don't believe you. Gave me a bunch of links to start with in terms of how Argo Events works. And so we're going to install this and actually make it work. But basically, it sounds like the key things that we're talking about here is that there's a gateway, which is essentially a place that accepts incoming events via a whole bunch of different mechanisms. HTTP is one of those things, but also things like SNS, SQS, GCP, PubSub, that type of thing. And then you have this sensor. And so the sensor is essentially a thing that takes events from the gateway and then runs it through a whole bunch of sort of stages to figure out what, filter it, forward it, do a whole bunch of different sort of processes on it before it then actually activates a trigger. And then the trigger, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, folks, the trigger is actually causing something to happen in a system. And so there are, let's see, if we're looking at triggers, a trigger is the resource executed by sensor once the event dependencies are resolved. And so that's some stuff that we're going to actually sort of start digging into here. And so it looks like there's a whole bunch of different things that can play in terms of event sources. And then in terms of triggers, there's, let's see, a trigger source is this source of a trigger resource. It can either be, I don't know. So we're going to dig into this because I don't fully understand everything that's going on here. But hopefully as we install it and start playing with it, I'll get a better idea of how to get going. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the Argo Events installation. And let's see. So we're going to create an Argo Events namespace. So Alexander says we're releasing final release before merge this to PRs. Is that for the GitOps engine? Alexander? Okay, so we have that up and running. And then they have sort of a big old installation.yaml. So what I'm going to do is yeah, okay, so cool. So like stuff is happening with the GitOps engine. It's just folks are working to bring it together. Okay, so this is all the different things. That goes in here. I'm not gonna go through all of this. Let's see. So this looks like it's really built to run inside of a namespace with so there's an Argo Events namespace. Okay, we already have that up and running. So one of the things that we can do is I'm going to do cap, and I always forget the. I know I have to give it a name. Deploy. Why do I forget? I think it's always like, yeah, it's A. Okay. A Argo Events. Oh, not 2 dashes, 1 dash. Oh, and then -F. Okay, let's see. VS Code, there we go, okay. Is that working? Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. We were dropping the last line. Okay. All right. So here, this is why I love CAP, is that it actually shows you what it's about to do. So we're going to install a custom resource definition for event sources, gateways, and sensors. And then inside the Argo Events namespace, we're going to have a service account, a deployment, a config map for the gateway controller, a sensor controller, and then we're going to have an Argo Events role and role binding. What I like about this, which I think is really, really cool, is that this actually has a mode where it installs into a single namespace. So this is not a cluster-wide system. Now, when I was looking at the installation instructions, you can install it at a cluster-wide thing, but you don't have to. You can actually install it in a more targeted way. So let's go ahead and do this and keep our fingers crossed that it all works. Magic is happening. It's probably downloading images. I actually have pretty fast internet here at home. I got like symmetric gigabit up and down. So, with this whole work from home thing, I've been sitting pretty, but I know not everybody is in the same situation. I definitely as we go through this whole quarantine thing, I've definitely had a bunch of, emotional ups and downs. It's been hard. The kids are getting used to it. But having internet, being able to watch videos, being able to connect to folks really is, such a big part of the experience here. So the question here, let's see, can CAP be used with Helm? Yeah, that's a good question. I think, one of the sort of advantages and disadvantages of Helm is that Helm really is the entire meal deal, both templating and application and sort of the packaging mechanics. There are ways with the Helm template to take a Helm chart and render it into YAML and then being able to use that with something like CAP. But it's not sort of the primary Helm experience to be able to do that. Whereas I like the way that CAP works here. So we're waiting for the sensor controller. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing here is this. This is the. Let's go through and we're going to launch Octane and we'll see what's happening here. And we can look at the Argo Events namespace. And we can look at pods here, and it looks like it's waiting for them to be running. What are they waiting for? Container's not ready. Okay. Bob Hobbs says the trigger can be either Argo workflow or other standard Kubernetes objects such as pods, deployments, etc. Now, can you actually send a HTTP request as part of this? So there we go. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. Okay, so container not ready. Let's look at logs here. We can actually, there's a lot going on here. Crash loop backup. All right, so something's not working. Let me figure out what's going wrong here. So these things are all, so I would expect to see something in the logs going on here. Is this a bug with, oh, here we go. Config maps, gateway controller config map is forbidden. User system service account Argo event cannot get resource config max in the namespace Argo event. So this looks like something went wrong with RBAC. And so let's look at, well, we can look at the RBAC roles. We couldn't find any roles. Couldn't find any role bindings. Yeah, so this makes me think that the RBAC roles didn't actually get rolled out. Let's see. So what's going on here? Kube control get role bindings. Oh, you know what? Ha ha ha. I bet you I know what happened here. Some of these things have, okay, the namespace is not specified in any of these things, or it's like the namespace is specified in some but not others. Yeah, so that is, okay, so that's a, so let's go ahead and we'll delete all those. Yeah, so, and you know what, I bet you if I had looked at the, so we're going to restart here. If I'd looked, oh yeah, see here, default, I should have noticed that. So that's the problem there. Okay. And so now, oh, what did I do there? Okay, cap. So this is actually one of the great things about cap help is that you can actually go through and it has a bunch of different ways to actually help you say, you know, which namespace, or you only want it to work in a single namespace. So we can go through and do -n and Argo Events, right? Wait, what did I call it? It was Argo-events. So what am I doing wrong here? Into NS. Okay. There we go. Okay, and now we see that like the namespace is the same here, and so that should work. Oh yeah, easy peasy. And then if we check like our deployments here, we can see that these things are looking good. And our pods are all running. Yeah. So we can actually see everything's green there. And then if we go and we look roles and role bindings, oh, that's ingresses. That's not what I want to do, roles. Cool. Yeah, so cap is pretty cool with stuff like that. Which is one of the, that's one of the reasons I really like cap, is that it essentially provides, you know, all these different tools for you to essentially ring fence the YAML so that you can say, well, I only want to allow it to work within this particular namespace, that type of thing. Really cool stuff there. Okay, so we are, where are we at? We're here, we've done that. We should have the thing installed. And then the next thing is there's essentially a tutorial introduction. Okay, so we'll create a webhook event source, a gateway, and a webhook sensor. Okay, so let's see how these things work. I should probably... Okay, and let's see, I want to get this one too. Oh, that's gateways, okay. Oh, sound missing? Can you hear me? Christoph says that we're missing sound. Can you hear me? Okay, so... Okay, so I'm just downloading all this YAML here. And let's take a quick look at what these things look like. Oh, they're all called webhook. Okay, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and just do a git clone of this because I don't want to be downloading all of those things. Okay, Argo events. And then this is in examples. Okay. And so we have, let's see. Yeah, I think it sounds good with the new mic. Is there a Kubernetes events importer into Argo? Oh, that's a good question, right? Can you actually use Kubernetes events to be able to trigger stuff? I don't know, like, if Kubernetes events are as useful as they should be there. That's actually a really good question. All right. So, okay. So we have the webhook event source. Okay. So let me go back here and do code here. We'll take a look at this. Okay, so we have event sources. Oh, and there's all sorts of stuff. So we're going to do the webhook one, which is probably the most generic one. And then there's also stuff like GitHub. Which, wow, okay, so there's a whole bunch of GitHub event source. All right, I need to dig into this and actually see how these things work. Okay, so this one, so we're creating an event source of type webhook. Gateway can run multiple HTTP servers. Simply define a unique port to start a new HTTP server. And so we're HTTP port 12,000, and then the example, and it's a post. Okay. And this one's unsecure, but you can also do TLS for this stuff too. Okay, so let's just go ahead and cap deploy. Well, oh, and then this thing, you know what? I'm going to do kubeNS. Do I have kubeNS installed? kubeNS Argo Events, right? Because otherwise we're going to cap deploy Argo Events. What are we starting with? I'm sorry, I'm the event source. Okay, so the chat is, you can with Knative, yeah. Okay, so Knative does support apparently using Kubernetes events as events. That's very, very interesting. So, okay. Okay, so that thing got installed. Now, one of the things I love about Octant is that we can actually go in here and look at custom resources. And here we have the event source. And we can, it's an easy way to view the YAML here. And we can have their spec. And then there's a whole bunch of metadata. Yeah. Okay, but there's no status written out. Okay, that's what I was just checking to see. Okay, so that, so we did. Okay, the gateway converts events from external sources into cloud events and then dispatches them to sensor. You can trigger workflows on Kate's events in Argo events as well. Okay, cool. So we'll get to that. Okay, so we're doing, okay, so now we have now we need a webhook gateway. So let's see what the gateway looks like. Okay, so the gateway controller with instance ID Argo events will process this gateway. Well, I'm a little bit confused on what's going on here. So the gateway is a webhook working with this event source. And then, okay, so this is essentially an operator that will run a set of containers for that gateway. But then it'll set up a service for the gateway of type equals load balancer. We should probably, I don't know, let's see what happens. And then it specifies a subscriber. So that means that when stuff comes into the gateway, it'll actually write it out to this particular event. So the gateway converts things into external event sources. Okay. And then can dispatch it. But I could probably, could I have this be a subscriber to Scott's thing that actually shows the events? I don't know. We can try that later. But let's do the, okay. And then if I'm doing like a GitHub one, there's a GitHub gateway. Okay, so this is the thing that actually knows how to convert things from the GitHub format into the CloudEvents format. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, one of the interesting things is that it looks like, Knative also has a whole bunch of capabilities for essentially converting events from external sources into cloud events. And maybe that should be part of the cloud events thing, is actually having these translators maybe as libraries, or as because just to use those sort of translators as widely as possible. Sorry, the dog's barking. Okay, so we're going through, and now we're doing gateways, webhook. Oh wait, that deleted the event source. Oh yeah, because that's how cap works. My bad. Okay, so I have to do -F. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now if I'm reading this right, this should actually go through, and we should have, okay, now we have a webhook gateway. Okay. It's interesting that we have this gateway controller. I'm wondering if there's places where, trying to have the gateway controller do that actually causes problems. Or maybe there's ways to actually, you can run a gateway. You don't have to use the gateway controller for doing it. Just thinking about all the different sort of, things that show up in the container spec, but and services and stuff. But yeah, looks workable. Okay, and then the last one we want to add on is the let's see, the webhook sensor. Okay, and so let's look at the sensor for webhook. And so this says we're going to run a sensor, so this will also go ahead and run stuff. And then when this happens, it'll actually create Argo workflow when this happens. So this is the trigger that this thing is doing. Subscribing to, so there's some port stuff, and then parameters here. Spec arguments, parameters, value. All right, so, and that's what the whale says. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up. I don't have Argo workflow installed. That may be something we have to deal with. Okay, and so the triggers, so here we're actually creating, it's a templated thing that actually creates a Kubernetes object when the trigger happens. Okay, so let's install Argo workflow real quick just for fun, just so that we can make this stuff work. Hopefully this is like an super easy getting started. Download the Argo CLI. Oh, okay. Into the rabbit hole I go. Okay, since this is kind, you'll need to use the PNS executor instead of the Docker executor. Oh, for Argo? When installing Argo workflows. Okay, so I'll take a look at that. We're gonna do some yak shaving here real quick. Let's see, brew search Argo. Does it show up on Homebrew? Oh, I can trigger a pod. How about we just do the trigger of the pod, because I don't want to, I just for time. Okay, so trigger sources. No, the standard Kubernetes resources. Okay, so here I'm configuring a pod, a deployment. Okay. So we're going to modify this. Okay, this is part of the tutorial. Okay, so let's go through, and we're in tutorials, O3 standard Kates. Wait, tutorials. Wait, where was it? Sorry. Examples, tutorials. O3. Oh, it's 04 now. Okay. Sensor pod. Okay, so this is a webhook sensor, and it's going to launch a pod that does uses generate name. That's cool. It's going to use the Argo Events service account, and it's going to call cowsay, and the dependency name is testdep. And so, okay, so hopefully, will this just work? Let's give it a try. Okay, so now if I go through and let's look to see what we got going on here. Okay, so now we have the webhook sensor that is running. So this is running all the time. So this isn't sort of a launch on demand type of thing. So I think that's a little bit different from probably the Knative eventing model. And then this thing, but you can make sensors, I assume, more and more complex in terms of what they do. And if I go through and let's go through and look at the tutorial. Here we are. Wait, no. Okay. And then, and now I can actually go through and I can do this to, oh, okay. I need to do cube can get services. Okay. So, oh God, how do I do this with kind? I want to hit port 12,000 load balancer. Oh shoot. How do we do? Kind type. Yeah, I thought there was a way to do this, but maybe I'm forgetting it. I think it's still kind of open. I thought there was a way to do it where it's kind of like mini cube tunnel. Okay, so we'll just do yeah, port forward. We'll do cube. Oh, you know what? Oh, this is another thing that Octant supports, I think. We can actually go through, and it's going to be the webhook gateway, right? And I believe, I thought there was a way for us to do port forward here. Maybe to a pod. Port forwards. There we go. How do I create a port forward? I know I can do it with kube control port forward, but I want to do it this way. I know that this is something that we had. And I'm trying to, from the service, maybe it's, yeah, maybe, no, I didn't think it was from the service. Now let's try. Webhook gateway service. So how do we do this? Okay, so apparently it doesn't support. Okay, we'll just do the kube control. I'll have to dig into that later. Port forward, and then we're going to deployment, and the one that we're going to webhook gateway. Okay, and then a list of ports. Is it What's the syntax? I always forget this. Okay. 12,000 to 12,000. Okay. Do that in the background. Now if we do that curl, boom. No, I have the latest version of Octant. So I'm going to have to figure out what's going on there. Okay, so if we look at pods, let's see, hello world, it's running. It's pulling the image, started the container. Back off warning. Did it actually fail somehow? Failed to pull image, Docker whale say unknown, failed to bump. Oh, there's an error with the image. Huh. Is this working? Lame. The example pod should probably have restart policy. Okay. The kind you can forward local ports through using the Docker port forward, but you need to do that at startup time. Okay. Y'all have to dig into that. So we're in image pull back off, where it's having problems pulling the image. Back off restarting failed container. Let's see what happens here. Okay, pod summary container port forward button. Pods. While we're waiting for that. Summary. I don't see the port forward button, man. I'll have to dig into it. Okay, so hello world. This thing is really having problems. Is this like... I'm wondering why this is Docker pull. You know, what do we do? We're trying to do... It fails too with Docker pull. Huh. Well, now it's working with Docker pull. Kind of flaky pulling images on my machine too. Yeah. Oh, the app that I'm using, that's Octant, which is yeah, oh yeah, look at that. Error response from daemon, unexpected EOF. There, can you see that now? This is why we built our own Cause image for workflow tests. Holy moly. So like, I don't know why this is working. Let's, okay. So Docker images. So we have Docker whale say latest. Okay. Created 4 years ago. Yeah. I mean, super secure, I'm sure. So kind, we have kind, load, Docker image, oh, Docker whale say, you can retag it and push it. Oh, do I have to retag it? Docker tag my whale say foo. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, is this thing still backing off? Okay. So we did that. Kind load. We'll say foo. Okay, so this should be putting that in there. We're going to go through, wait for that to do its thing. You can load it without tagging it. Okay, so I can. Let me do that. Oh, not the tag. Let me do that one too, and we'll see what happens. So this probably does a whole bunch of like tar shenanigans in the background, I'm guessing. Okay, so hello world, pod rescheduled, image ID. Oh yeah, it's pull policy always. Gah. So, well, this is a real pain in the butt, let me tell you. So this is, it's there. Okay, so we should have it there. Cube control get pods. Cube control. Now we're in crash loop back off. Describe cube control get pod hello. So why is it in crash loop backup? Restarting failed container. Is it because it's still trying to pull it? All right, I'm just gonna cube control delete pod. What's that? Yeah, so restart. Well, my keyboard was all screwed up. Cube control delete pod. Okay, so we're just going to do that. We're going to start over. Okay, so now we're going to go through and we're going to look at the sensor. We're launching a pod. It's going to create this thing. Containers name command cow say. So the question here is we want to have and I always forget the pod schema, so this is cube control describe pod. No, it's admission controller. It sets image pull policy to not always for kind clusters. Yeah, that might be good. Okay, so image pull policy never, right? And then we'll and then we need image restart policy. I always forget the syntax for this. Image restart policy. Pod lifecycle restart policy. Never. Okay. So I think that should hopefully work. Now we'll go ahead, deploy. It's going to do that. Now let's look at Octant. Okay, and now I have to do the curl again. Pods. Hello world. What's it trying to do? Oh, it's still got the image pull back off. What is going on here? Image pull policy might need to be if not present. Well, it should be there. Oh, starting, back off, restarting failed container. Successfully pulled. So it says it failed. Oh, there we go. So it worked, but then it says it failed. But like at this point we had, did I screw up the image restart, the restart policy? Oh, where does restart policy belong? I put it in the wrong place and I used that. No, it's not. It's restart policy, not image restart policy. Gah. Yeah. Okay, now if I do this, it should launch another one. If I look at pods, right? So we have 2 of them running. And this one, it's definitely like there is something going on weird with the image pulling. Started container, started hello container. And we can look at logs and it worked. I mean, it's kind of screwed up, but okay. So that worked. All right. So yeah, so this is actually cool. So what's happening here is, and let's cube control. Okay, so they're both completed now. This one has a bunch of restarts. So cube control, delete, pod. Still, if that image is late, it's still in the go around. Oh, because it probably, yeah, we probably need to do the foo tag. Okay, well that's okay. We got okay. So let's go through. I'm gonna do foo here. What did I had? Whale say foo. Let's do that. Cap. Okay, and then we'll do. So one of the things that I think is interesting here, and I would love to hear, like, because this will create a bunch of jobs. Is there something else that helps to reap these things? And so this one here. Yeah, so, okay, so this one's running just like normal. Okay, so this didn't hit any errors. And we're up and running. Okay. And then when I look at pods, we can see that these things are succeeded. So yeah, is there something that'll actually garbage collect and reap these things? Yes, if it's a job, it's in the job spec, it'll actually go ahead and do it. But this is a pod, not a job. And so I think one of the things that might be interesting here with Argo events is, and maybe is it looks like the standard resources are pod and deployment. I would expect that job would be one of these things here too. And then you can do custom resource. Okay, let's do some more stuff here and actually figure stuff out here. Yeah, if it's a job, then eventually the pod GC. So yeah, I think having something in Argo events for, you know, using the GC mechanics would be really interesting. Okay, so here we're creating circuit and switches. Let's play around with this. So what is circuits and switches? Okay, previous sections you have been dealing with just a single dependency. But in many cases, you want to wait for multiple events to occur and then trigger a resource, which means that you need a mechanism to determine which triggers to execute based on a set of different event dependencies. Oh, this is cool. So you can say, like, when this happens and that happens, then I want to actually go through and do this thing. All right, so let's go through and let's look at sort of what we have going on here, because we have circuit and switches. Okay, so so this example has us do webhook event source. So this is the same as the event source that we have right now, so we don't need to do anything else. And then we have the gateway. So the gateway and the event source are the same, right? And then, okay, and then we have a Minio event source and gateway. We're not going to do that. We're just going to play. So we have sensor 01 and sensor. Argo workflow with the name group 1 is created following output. Okay, so let's look at sort of what's going on here. So this says that we have a circuit sensor, and this is waiting on, both the webhook gateway and the Minio gateway to actually come through. And and trigger when either of these things. Oh, fascinating. Okay. And then this one is an and. Okay. And then we're going to trigger a workflow that does cowsay. Okay, so I think we can probably, let's see. So the question here is that the dependency, okay, we can do an event name coming from the gateway. So let's see. So where does the event name come from? Okay, so if I do this, and I'm going to say, comes from the event source. Okay, so the event name is, so the event source, is that something that we're going to see? Oh, event source ref. Okay. Okay, I see. So this here is the event, or no, example is the event name, right? Okay. All right, so we're going to go through and, okay. Interesting. Okay. So the event, I would expect that it would pull something from like CloudEvents. Like, can I actually do something like where part of my sensor, I actually, yeah, you can do multiple event configurations within a single event source. But I'm wondering, as part of my sensor, can I actually go through and key off of stuff that's in the CloudEvents stuff, like the CloudEvents type or something like that? That'd be something that'd be interesting. Okay, so we're going to do example 2 here. We're going to do webhook 2. Okay, and then we're going to do webhook 2, and we're going to do, and then switch triggers. When is the switch that determines whether to execute the trigger or not? All of group 1. So I'm kind of confused. So there's the so the difference between the circuit and the switch is confusing to me a little bit. What is the difference between those? So here we can, okay, circuits and switch. Okay, circuit is a Boolean expression. To create a circuit, you just need a switch. Is the conditional execution gate for a trigger. Want to trigger an Argo workflow if the sensor receives an event from the webhook gateway, but another workflow. Oh, I see. So you can actually specify do this one or the other one. Interesting. I would love to actually see, as part of the documentation, sort of the examples of sort of like when this stuff comes into play. But let's do the and here, and we're going to do group 1 and group 2 name, and then we're going to steal from this one here because we had this stuff up and running. Okay, and so this is going to be the template. Okay. Okay, so I think what's going to happen here. Okay, and then I need to go through and I need to change the webhook thing here. No, that's the gateway. The webhook event source. Right, and we're going to run 2 of these things, and we're going to call this one example 2, example 2. Okay, so I think I have this wired up now. Okay, so we're going to update the event source. We're going to update the sensor. So now, okay, so let's look at Octane and see what we have. We have a couple of completed hello worlds. We have the gateway controller, the sensor, and all that stuff. Okay, so if I go through and I do, okay, you may want to change the name of the sensor from circuit sensor to webhook sensor. Oh, okay, gotcha. On the, yeah, because I'm mixing and matching the different tutorials here. So I'm definitely going off script here. Oh, wait, triggers template. Wait, I'm confused. Oh, I had two things here. Okay. I screwed this up. Okay. So this is hello circuit. Right? And then webhook gateway. Well, okay, so I think name of the sensor from circuit sensor to, okay, webhook. Wait, did I? It says that, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. Okay, so, and now we're doing 05, 06 circuits and switches, and here we're doing sensor 01.yaml. Okay, so that'll update the webhook sensor. Okay, now if I do a curl to example, that should not have run anything, right? Because we've only run one and not the other. So we haven't run anything yet. But now if I do another curl to example 2, this should actually, if I'm thinking right. Okay, what did I screw up? Webhook gateway, sensor controller. You can check the groups. Okay, where would I check the groups? Example 1. Did I name it example 1? I don't think I did. Where do I check the groups? So group 1 and group 2, name, blah, blah, blah. I guess we can go through and maybe look at logs here. Executing the trigger, webhook gateway, hello's trigger name, hello circuit dash. Sensor state updated successfully with phase equals error. Okay, so now if I go through and if I look at sensors, and I look at the YAML here, status, note, stored versions. Oh wait, that is, oh, that's a custom resource. Haha, sorry, that's not where I want to be looking. I want to be looking at where cluster, okay. Webhook sensor. There we go, YAML. Okay, so here, dependency group is complete. Okay, so this is essentially a log of a bunch of the stuff that happened. Here's the trigger. Well, this is a lot of data in terms of what's happening. The sensor needs to change the trigger from workflow to pod. Ah, that's the problem. Kind pod. There you go. And then this is, wait, did I thought I did that. I'm sorry. Let me copy and paste from the sensor pod. Okay, this is the trigger that I want here, right? Because this is pods version v1. Sorry. Okay, triggers. And we need to do this, and then we're going to do the switch, actually. Was that part of the template? Okay, so that should be it. Okay. Okay. So triggers, and then, okay, a couple of things that I'd love to see in YAML is like being able to collapse stuff with collapsing some of the stuff, like the fields and all that stuff by default, because you generally don't want to see that. Here's spec, and then status here, because there's a whole bunch of extra gunk in here that we don't necessarily want. But okay, let's actually try and hit this again and see what happens. Okay, so we're going to hit this to example, example 2, pods. Yep, and then it launched it, I think. 9 seconds, yeah. So this is one, and it succeeded. It already ran. And so we can do logs, and that worked. Okay, but the one problem that we had is that we're doing spec.containers arg0. I guess, like, I'm not sure where the args come from there. So that's actually pretty cool. Okay, so that's really cool. So you can do some of these like workflows where it's like, first I want, you know, I want these two things to happen. And when that happens, then I actually trigger something. And so it's interesting because there's definitely state going on in the sensor that does that state get actually, you know, persisted into the CRD? I expect it probably does. And then similarly, we have, you can filter based on data, context, and time. So that's cool. Yeah, I definitely feel like some visualizations would definitely help here. A policy for a trigger determines whether the trigger results in success or failure. HTTP. Yeah, so I think, you know, one of the things that I think would be a lot of fun to see is maybe an extension for Octant for actually being able to view, you know, the relationship between all these different things, what the current status is. That would be super cool here. And it's one of the things that I'm sure the Octant team would love to hear, you know, if you're able to do that and how that works, because, you know, you could have like another thing here that could be like, you know, Argo events and Argo workflows and actually have that visibility showing up there. That'd be super cool. Okay, so I'm going to call it here. I think I got a good sense of how this stuff works. Oh, one more thing I wanted to try. So let's try Cloud Events. Let's try invoke, and we're doing HTTP localhost 12,000, and then 12,000 example, and then, oh, send, not invoke. Okay, so send is what I want. Okay, and there's all sorts of, and then I can say, we can do source type, and I can do type, you know, foo.bar. Oh, did it not work? Oh, wait. ID and source not sent. Does it, can it actually just sort of make me an ID? Must ensure this. ID foo source equals me. Okay, error sender server gave HTTP response to HTTPS client. Oh, I don't want to do HTTPS. Got a 400 bad request. Uh-oh. I wonder why we got a bad request. Let's look at the webhook gateway. Huh. Doesn't show anything. There is another container. Oh, I have to want to look in the other container. Oh, okay, gotcha. Ah, webhook events. There we go. Okay. Endpoint example, JSON, error calling Marcel JSON for type raw message, expected end of JSON input. So Oh, is examples or example? It's example. You can pass a body. Okay, so how do I pass the body? Is it like data? Hello. Still got invalid carry, looking for beginning of value. So it, So does the webhook gateway actually support cloud events natively? That's something that I think would be interesting. Because we have, okay, the gateway expects JSON data. Okay. Data will do. There we go. Okay. And now we can actually send this to example 2 also. And we should see. Yep, it ran. Sweet. Well, that's pretty cool. All right, so I think I'm out of time here. Let me sort of sum up some of my thinking here, because I think, you know, I'm a total noob when it comes to sort of this cloud event space. I think I really like, I like the idea that we can start normalizing events, bring them in, and actually start dealing with them coming from different directions, right? And I think that example of like, well, I want to wait until X happens and Y happens, and one of them could be coming from Minio, the other one could be coming from GitHub, something like that. But I can actually view, you know, deal with those things in sort of a universal way. I think that's super cool. Argo events, I think, you know, it took me a little while to understand the relationship between the gateways, the sensors, and the event sources. And so that's definitely something that I'm still wrapping my head around, and actually understanding how those things, you know, relate to cloud events, right? Like the event source thing, like is really, you know, it comes down to, let's see if I find the event source. The event source really comes down to essentially the name that you give for a path that you're listening to. I think it would also be interesting as part of the sensor to be able to, you know, essentially, let's see, as we look, not that one, I was looking at sensor 01. You know, as I look at the dependencies, can I actually have dependencies based on other parts of the cloud event schema? Oh, Walid, I'm sorry you missed it. So like, you know, so essentially, can we actually make this be sort of cloud events native in more ways, right? That's something that I'm thinking about. And I would love, and I think, you know, we didn't have time to explore it, but are there ways to, you know, have Argo events actually play a part of sort of a cloud events ecosystem that involves things like Knative and stuff also. And so one of the things that I think might be interesting, and I didn't see this, maybe, or HTTP trigger. So what does this do? So this says, oh, we should have tried this. Oh, so this was the kubeless is the example here. Is, can we go through, okay, so we have a HTTP. Okay, so this is cool. You know, we ran out of time getting to this, but if I look at sensor 01 here the trigger is like, oh, just call this. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And you can actually sort of do the payload stuff. Okay, so that's cool. So I think, yeah, it would be really fun to actually see like, hey, can Argo events actually add some value in terms of providing some of this filtering, some of the dependency stuff when combined with something like Knative, and actually bring these things together. Oh, sorry, I wasn't sharing my screen. I'll show you what I was looking at. Sorry. So yeah, there's a HTTP trigger here that we didn't get a chance to dig into, but then that actually translates to like sensor 01 here, and so there is a sort of trigger of type HTTP trigger, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and so I would love to see us, more examples of a sort of ecosystem of things that can pass stuff around using cloud events. Another example would be, how does this interact with something like Dapper that we looked at a little while ago? And I don't know if Dapper supports cloud events, does it? It supports, I don't think it does. Not yet, at least. Oh, wait, here we go. Boost interoperability with Cloud Events 1.0 and Azure Event Grid. So I don't know about Dapper, but Dapper has a bunch of integrations for being able to say, run this thing when you receive something from this queue. I think, I would love to actually, look at more examples of how Cloud Events become sort of this interoperability language between different systems. I think that's really interesting. So, all right. So that is it for me for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And stay safe, stay healthy, stay inside. That's what I'm doing. I think this is rough for all of us. Oh, and here's my kiddo. This is Theo. He's joining me on TGIK. And y'all have a good weekend, and we will see you sometime later. Thank you.